In our headlines on this Wednesday afternoon, February 22nd. In separate speeches, US President Joe Biden says Vladimir Putin is to blame for Ukraine's bloodshed, while Mr. Putin claims Russia invaded in self-defense. Meanwhile, health authorities here say starting March 1st, those entering from neighboring China will not be required to take PCR tests upon arrival. Data shows January this year was the most joyless for this particular month among members of the public, given Korea's high inflation and fewer job openings. Russia's Vladimir Putin has suspended a nuclear arms control pact signed with the US, raising the stakes in the broader confrontation over his military campaign in Ukraine. Speaking of which, US President Joe Biden has renewed his accusation of atrocities by Putin against Ukrainians. Our Lee Sing-jae reports.
During a State of the Nation address on Tuesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced Moscow will be suspending the New START nuclear reduction treaty with the U.S., the last remaining agreement which regulates the world's two largest nuclear arsenals.
They want to deliver us a strategic defeat and claim our nuclear facilities. Regarding this, I have to say that Russia suspends its participation in the New START treaty.
Putin, however, stressed that Russia is not completely abandoning the treaty, but only suspending it for the time being. He also noted that amid the ongoing geopolitical tensions, Russia will need to be ready to conduct nuclear tests, but only if the U.S. does so first. The New START treaty limits the number of intercontinental range nuclear weapons that the U.S. and Russia can have. Both countries can also inspect each other's weapons sites under the pact. It was extended in 2021 for another 5 years. Putin's speech addressed Russia's political and military elite, who gave the Russian president several standing ovations. However, the reaction from Ukraine was completely different. Kyiv says Putin's latest speech indicates that Russia has reached a strategic dead end and that Putin is in a completely different reality. Meanwhile, over in Warsaw, U.S. President Joe Biden delivered a speech a day after a secret visit to Kyiv, promising that Russia will never be victorious over Ukraine, while vowing unwavering support for Ukraine.
Brutality will never grind down the will of the free, and Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. Never.
Meanwhile, 6 people were killed and 12 others wounded in Russian shelling in Kherson on Tuesday. The Ukrainian Southern Command said the shellings occurred while Russian President Vladimir Putin was giving a State of the Nation address. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky called the latest attack a ruthless killing of civilians, adding that Russia targeted residential areas, high-rise buildings, public transport stops, and parking lots. Lee Sing-jae, Arirang News.
Also on the international front, Turkish authorities on Tuesday reported 1,154 additional losses of lives following this past Monday's earthquake, also in the southern part of the country. Now, that being said, the number of fatalities from the recent natural disasters in Türkiye has surged past 42,000, while the tally in Syria stands at some 5,800. In total, over 48,000 people have lost their lives in the two countries. New satellite imagery shows that North Korea may be involved in ship-to-ship transfers on its west coast. Making reference to images taken by Planet Labs, Voice of America on Wednesday claimed 2 more ships were added on Monday to the lineup of vessels seen the day prior. Then on Tuesday, 2 or 3 more vessels were captured on camera close to these 5 ships, with as many as 8 ships gathered in the area. Pundits believe the vessels are engaged in massive ship-to-ship transfers in further violations of UN Security Council resolutions. On the pandemic front, health authorities here have decided to lift their PCR testing requirement on arrivals from neighboring China starting next Wednesday. Our Song Yu-jin has more.
South Korea is further easing travel rules for travelers from China. The Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters announced on Wednesday that from March 1st, travelers from mainland China will no longer have to get PCR tests upon arrival. They've been required to get tested within a day of entering the country since January 2nd after Beijing's decision to end zero COVID policies and an uptick in infections in China. Also from next month, flights departing from China heading to South Korea will be allowed to land at other airports. Flights from China will continue to arrive at Incheon International Airport only until the end of February. The decision was made on the back of the improved virus situation both at home and abroad.
South Korea's daily COVID-19 tally last week averaged around 11,599, down 14.4% from the week before. The number of critically ill patients has dropped to around 100 for the first time in 7 months. The percentage of travellers from China who've tested positive declined to 0.6% last week from 18.4% in the first week of January.
The latest new changes mean there will be only 2 remaining measures for visitors coming from China: proof of a negative COVID-19 test taken before departure, and travelers must provide their contact information to the Quarantine Information Pre-Entry System through the Q-Code app for effective tracking and tracing. These restrictions were also set to expire on February 28th, but health authorities pushed back the date to March 10th. Whether or not these rules are scrapped will depend on the virus situation then. Seoul has been lifting its virus protocols on Beijing one by one. On February 11th, the government decided to resume the issuance of short-term visas for Chinese nationals. Last Friday, it announced that the number of inbound flights from China would increase from the current 62 per week to 80 by the end of this month, rising to 100 per week from March. 송유진, Arirang News.
In other news, Korea's census data for 2022 shows the most dramatic drop in natural population since relevant data compiling began. According to Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the country recorded 249,000 births and 372,800 deaths last year, translating to a natural population decline of 123,800. Now, this is the 3rd year in a row that natural population, which excludes immigration and emigration, has fallen. Meanwhile, population mobility also fell for the 25th month in a row in January. It was down 8.4% on year, largely owing to the slump in the housing market. Just 506,000 people moved into new neighborhoods, the lowest figure for January since 1987. And this year's January appears to have been the most miserable for the public, with people reacting to high inflation and limited work opportunities. Our finance correspondent Kim Yeon-sung explains.
Soaring inflation is making life tough for the average South Korean. The misery index for South Korea peaked to the highest for the month of January since data was first compiled in 1999. This from analysis by Democratic Party of Korea lawmaker Kim Hye-jae. The misery index is an economic indicator that combines unemployment and inflation rates to measure the economic distress felt by the average citizen. The higher the number, the bigger the distress. The misery index for last month was suggested at 8.8. That tops the previous high for January, which was 8.0 in January 2010. January tends to be tougher economically. The cold weather slims opportunities for outdoor jobs like construction while driving up heating costs at home. Unemployment once again topped 1 million in January, although it is still lower than it was a year earlier. But with the recent hike in energy and electricity prices, inflation in January once again topped 5%. It is amid these economic challenges that the central bank will meet on Thursday to decide on its key interest rate. South Korea's current rate stands at 3.5. The Bank of Korea is considering whether to raise rates by 25 basis points. Opinions were split down the middle during the last monetary policy meeting. 3 committee members said this is a good point to stop for now, and 3 others said that the rates still need to be raised to put soaring inflation under control. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
Space is South Korea's new frontier for economic expansion as well as national security. Now, this is according to President Yoon Suk-yeol while hosting a luncheon for scientists in the industry as well as young scholars in the field. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
Inviting around 40 guests from the space industry to his office for lunch on Tuesday, President Yoon Suk-yeol pledged to make South Korea the leader of the new space era and asked for them to help.
우주는 이미 기술 혁신과 경제 성장 그리고 국가 안보를 이끌어가는 핵심 동력으로 주목받고 있습니다. 그래서 여기 계신 여러분의 역할이 매우 중요합니다.
Dubbing the event as Discussions with Pioneers in Space Economy, the guests range from high school students to startups that have successfully tested their prototypes. He also took his time to see some models and learn about the progress. Models he saw included satellites as well as the first liquid-fueled engine developed by a private company.
높이를 몇 킬로까지 쏠 수 있어요?
At the moment, our goal is around 80 kilometers and the final goal is 500 kilometers.
Yoon also spoke of the size of the new space industry and said the market has grown significantly. He added, in the 20th century, space was an unknown world, an area of exploration, and an arena for tech-strong countries. But now, space is an area to create value not just for countries, but for companies also.
우주 경제에는 경계가 없습니다. 또 우주 경제는 우리에게 무한한 기회를 열어줄 것입니다. 우주 탐사와 활용, 또 이를 위한 발사체와 위성 개발, 제작, 발사, 운영은 물론 관련한 가치를 창출하는 모든 활동이 바로 우주 경제입니다.
President Yoon reiterated his plans for South Korea to launch its own space agency staffed by the nation's top scientists. He also promised government funding for the space industry in areas yet to see big growth in order to lay the foundations for a strong and successful market. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
A substantial number of foreigners are venturing into Korea simply to learn its language amid the growing popularity of K-music, movies and drama. Our Kim Jung-sil covers the phenomenon.
Students in this class have come from all over the world to study the Korean language. These students are from 6 different countries and all have come with different purposes in mind. But one language instructor at the institute says most students are here because of K-pop and K-dramas.
Before, many students came to learn Korean to get into college or to help find a job in Korea or because they have Korean family. But recently, most of the students come because they are interested in K-culture such as K-pop, dramas, or movies.
A recent CNN report quoted a Korean language expert from Columbia University as saying that Korean has become modern, cooler, and hipper. Students in South Korea seem to agree.
Especially recently, with like Netflix and all those sort of international things, there's a lot more interest growing in sort of that sort of sphere as well. And yeah, I know a lot of my friends, they sort of talk about that kind of thing, and then yeah, it's sort of grown from there.
The Korean Language Center of Korea University currently has more than 1,000 international students registered. Seoul National University, on the other hand, has been offering a special program for Japanese students since 1992. The program resumed last winter after a pause during the pandemic.
The students here just arrived last week from Japan's prestigious Keio University. They've come here to learn the Korean language and culture, but also to better understand Korea as a nation.
I'm studying Japanese politics and I found many similarities between Japan and South Korea in their culture and politics, so I decided to join the program to learn Korean.
I have a lot of interest in Korean culture, especially in entertainment, so I was hoping to learn more Korean so that I can understand it from a different viewpoint.
Since South Korea's entertainment business is at a global level, the majority of the students have the motivation to learn Korean. What I always tell them is that South Korea and China are geologically our close neighbors, so we should get along with those countries. And in order to get along with Korean people, that it's vital to learn the language.
All the students we met said they want to make the most out of their experience in South Korea. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
And riding high on the Hallyu wave is K-art in its modern form, with many renowned Korean artists sharing their contemporary work at top galleries. Our Yoon Jin has more on this trend.
Even K-pop artists like RM from BTS have expressed their admiration for the more classic as well as modern Korean fine arts. That is how much more widespread interest in K-art is becoming. Modern K artist Lee Yoon will be having his first solo exhibition at the Pace Gallery, a leading contemporary art gallery in New York City that showcases international work from some of the most significant artists and estates of the 20th and 21st centuries. Considered a representative of Korean avant-garde and experimental artists, Lee Yoon will be displaying his work that takes a different, new and unique approach to a painter's physical actions while creating a painting, which has been drawing the attention of American enthusiasts.
The exhibition will take up 2 floors. Most of the work will be familiar to fans, but what's a bit special is that Lee will be doing an opening performance on the opening day in New York.
On top of that, later in the year, in September, a large-scale K-art exhibition featuring a collection of more than 100 works by leading Korean experimental artists is set to be held at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. With K-art spreading globally and receiving international recognition, the domestic art industry has been fully supportive, including the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art.
We were very excited when the Guggenheim Museum said they would make 3 floors available for the exhibition. This also shows their high anticipation.
The success of Lee Bae's exhibition at the Periton Gallery in Shanghai last year was followed by a private exhibition of Yoon Hyung-gun held at the David Zwirner Gallery in Paris earlier this year. That more than 1,000 visitors came to Yoon's exhibition on the opening day is proof of the international interest in Korean monochromatic paintings. And as the momentum for global opportunities for modern Korean artists grows, they are gaining ground with work displayed at different locations that are home to iconic artwork. 이은진, Arirang News.
In a remarkable ruling for members of the local LGBTQ community, Korea has marked its first legal recognition of social benefits for same-sex couples. Our Han Sung-woo has details.
In a landmark ruling on Tuesday, a South Korean gay couple won a lawsuit granting them the same spousal coverage that heterosexual married couples receive from the National Health Insurance Service. The Seoul High Court, according to a spokesperson, overturned a decision made by a lower court back in January last year that referenced South Korea's legal definition of marriage as a union between a man and a woman. A year before that, in February 2021, plaintiff So Sung-uk had sued the NHIS after it terminated benefits for him by disqualifying him as a dependent of his male partner and thus ordering Seoul to pay insurance premiums. Seoul said the NHIS had first covered him as a dependent under his partner's employer-based health insurance program in February 2020, but later reversed the decision after discovering they were a gay couple. In response, he has claimed they were discriminated against, considering that the NHIS provides spousal coverage to common law partners. In Tuesday's ruling, the Seoul High Court has ordered the NHIS to allow the plaintiff to file as a spousal dependent. His lawyer, as well as Amnesty International, say it's the first case of a court in South Korea recognizing the legal status of same-sex couples. Activists have hailed the verdict as a major victory for LGBTQ rights. AFP reports that the NHIS will appeal to the Supreme Court. South Korea by law does not recognize marriages between people of the same sex. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. News on the environmental front as the International Energy Agency has condemned the global energy industry over a failure to reduce its methane emissions. According to a report released by the agency on Tuesday, the energy industry released approximately 135 million tons of methane into the atmosphere in 2022. This is despite promises by energy firms to find and repair infrastructure to prevent gases from leaking. It's an increase from the previous year's emissions, but still below the record set in 2019. The IEA says that despite some progress over the years, methane levels are not falling fast enough. The energy industry is responsible for 40% of the world's methane emissions, the most out of all human activity. Methane is a major factor in climate change, accounting for at least a third of global temperature rises since the Industrial Revolution. Meanwhile, canals are running dry in the city of Venice as Italy faces another drought. The concerns come as Italy has experienced a notably dry winter with a lack of rainfall and less than half the usual amount of snowfall in the Alps. Water from this alpine snow flows into Italy's rivers and lakes, feeding the country's agricultural sector. The lack of rain, combined with unusually low tides, has also dried up Venice's famous canals. Some of the waterways have been reduced to mud, leaving the city's iconic gondolas stranded. This comes just 1 year after Italy experienced its worst drought in 7 decades. Moving over to the United Kingdom, where the world's biggest 4-day workweek study has yielded positive results. According to findings published on Tuesday, employees taking part reported better sleep, reduced stress levels, improvements to their personal lives and mental health. There was also a drop in resignations. Some companies, meanwhile, reported no major changes to revenue during the experiment. Organized by 4-Day Week Global, the program ran from June to December last year. It involved almost 3,000 employees across 61 companies. The program saw firms adopt different ways to reduce employee working hours while paying the same salary. And finally, the European Space Agency is set to peer into the dark universe with a new telescope. Presented by the agency on Tuesday, the spacecraft is called Euclid. Euclid will travel to its destination, 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, to help scientists further study dark matter, dark energy, and gravity. The telescope functions by taking pictures of billions of galaxies at a distance of 10 billion light-years, across more than a third of the sky. It then creates a 3D map that allows scientists to observe light distortion. The Space Telescope is slated to be launched on top of a SpaceX Falcon 9 in July this year from Cape Canaveral in Florida. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. We needed an extra layer this morning as most parts of the country had a sub-zero start to the day. The warmer temperatures are rolling in this afternoon with daily highs going up slightly higher than season norms. Temperature gaps in Daegu, in fact, could be as wide as 15 degrees Celsius today. Southern parts of the country are seeing double-digit highs under partly sunny skies. Then there could be rain on 전라남도 and 경상남도 province late tonight into tomorrow at dawn. The air quality will be decent today despite the rise in highs. But south of Gyeonggi-do and Chungcheong-Pukto provinces and Sejong will have bad air quality tonight and will get worse tomorrow. Meanwhile, a dry weather advisory remains in place in the capital region and east of Gangwon-do province today. Then a mix of rain and snow is in the forecast on Friday in Gangwon-do and Jeju. The rest of the country remains under bright skies with more up and down temperatures expected for the time being. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
Well, those are the headlines at this hour, but do stay with us for our panel session coming up right after this break. See you in a bit.